This lecture will be class B for the Refuat HaNefesh and Guf of Garrett and for all of Klal Yisrael and for the Rebbe for to bring Mashiach now. Okay. Bamidbar will be Bamidbar. Likkutei, sichos. And starting with some NASO's class teaching. It's good. Start. When speaking about establishing unity between the different components of a whole, for example, unity within the diverse elements of existence or unity within the Jewish people, Hasidus generally describes two motifs. Rebbe brings this from likkutei, parashas, and sichos. The source cited there. So although the different components vary in form and function, they operate in synergy, each contributing an element the other is lacking. Each element possesses a unique endowment that is needed by and benefits all the others. Take, for example, the human body. Although it is made up of a variety of diverse organs, they work in complementary harmony, each contributing a necessary element to the operation of the body. The feet, for example, enhance the function of the brain. The mobility that the feet contribute expose our senses to a greater range of stimuli, enabling the brain to collect and process information. The individual identities of the different components are subsumed in the awareness of a common collective identity. To refer back to the analogy of the body, a person possesses a consciousness of self, an I that encompasses his entire being. As a result, the various organs do not perceive themselves as independent, separate entities, but as part of an organic whole. When a person stubs his toe, not only his foot feels the pain. These two motifs are dependent on each other. The organic synergy between the different components is dependent on the shared collective identity. Without that collective consciousness, the relationship between the two different components is solely one of give and take. The connection between the different entities and or people depends on the benefit one will provide for the other, and when one feels that joining together is not to his advantage, he will withdraw from the group. By contrast, there is a common identity that joins the different elements of the whole. The differentiating characteristics each entity possesses are seen as resources to be shared by all, not as sources of competition and strife. Each of the motifs of unity possesses an advantage of its own. The advantage of the second motif is that the collective consciousness that results from being part of a whole lifts each of the components above their individual selves and joins them in a loftier, more inclusive identity. However, this overriding consciousness does not acknowledge the uniqueness of each of the individual elements that make up the collective. From that perspective, There is advantage to the first motif, the superiority of the oneness that is a function of interrelationship and interdependence, is that it does not negate the individual part, even while maintaining a comprehensive sense of unity. So, Achdus. This is speaking on Achdus, which is oneness. Echad, Achdus. This is a basic building block of Hasidic thought. This is the body as a whole, seeing the Jewish people as a whole, like many organs, many body parts. Jumping to when one goes beyond the letter of the law. Because some people in the Jewish nation go above and beyond, goes beyond the letter of the law. Some don't, some do. So on this basis, it is possible to explain the differences in the versions of the above narrative in the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Bavli uses the wording, who is fit for the divine presence to rest upon him. This is not speaking about the lofty level of Ruach HaKodesh. As such, it is understood that the Talmud Bavli is referring to ordinary levels of humility and bittul, including the two general categories: A level where one is humble in his own eyes, and B, a lofty level that he feels himself inferior and lowly when compared to others. Generally speaking, this is the distinction between the humility that characterizes Shmuel HaKatan, Samuel, Hillel's student, and Hillel himself, who was renowned for his humility. Therefore, when the eulogy quoted in the Talmud described Hillel using progressive levels of distinction, said, alas, pious one, alas, humble one. By contrast, regarding Shmuel HaKatan, his eulogy began with humility because his humility was on a lower level than Hillel's. The Talmud Yerushalmi takes a different tack and speaks about an even loftier level of Ruach HaKodesh. The humility associated with this level is an entirely different nature than the humility described previously. Hillel epitomized this level. Not only did he hold himself lowly in relation to other people, but he also related to them all with patience and forbearance. He descended and lowered himself to people of base stature, and even to non-Jews who came to convert with an attitude that caused Shammai to refuse to accept them. Nevertheless, Hillel accepted them because of his great humility, one that knew no limits, as the Talmud states. Afterwards, the convert said, the humility of Hillel brought us close, under the wings of the divine presence. Due to his humility, Hillel involved himself with the most lowly and base, even with non-Jews. Humility of this type is connected with Ruach HaKodesh. According to this understanding, it can be said that when the Talmud Yerushalmi uses the expression alas humble and pious ones, it was not speaking of two separate qualities as the Talmud Bavli did. Instead, the intent was a single virtue, pious humility. Piety involves being generous with one's maker, going beyond the letter of the law, but pious humility implies the humility that goes beyond the letter of the law. This characterizes Hillel. He possessed the virtue of pious humility. He was humble beyond the letter of the law and lowered himself before everyone, even before base people, reflecting his attainment of the third level of humility mentioned above. Furthermore, based on the above, it is possible to say that when the Talmud Yerushalmi spoke of Shmuel HaKatan, it also implied such a lofty level of humility that was expressed in a manner similar to Hillel's. Therefore, the Talmud Yerushalmi did not content itself with saying, why was he called Katan, the small? as he held himself small, but also continued, there were those who say that he is described with this name because he was only slightly less than the prophet Shmuel of Ramah. Shmuel was an actual prophet, and his dedication to the Jewish people was of a wondrous nature. With utter selflessness, he would journey from city to city to judge the people, hearing and patiently resolving disputes concerning their business needs and the like. This demonstrated the great degree of bittul and humility he possessed. Shmuel HaKatan was considered small in relation to him, although he was also characterized by humility. His humility was comparable, but less than that of the prophet Shmuel. True, the Talmud Bavli relates the same story. However, according to the above explanations, it can be said that it is speaking about a lower level of humility, both with regard to Hillel and with regard to Shmuel HaKatan. However, a straightforward explanation can be given. Both Hillel and Shmuel HaKatan experienced different levels of spiritual development at different times in their lives, and it can be taken for granted that they ascended to loftier levels over the course of time. This is true also of their attributes of humility and bittul. Therefore, the Talmud Bavli, which speaks about a lower level, the resting of the divine presence, highlights a lower level of humility. By contrast, the Talmud Yerushalmi speaks about a loftier rung, as explained above. Was it the same story? When concluding the study of the Talmudic tractate, it is common to explain it with the context of ideas of a greater scope. The above discussion of the relationship between humility and Ruach HaKodesh contributes to the understanding of a similar story that serves as a conclusion of Tractate Sota in the Talmud Yerushalmi. An incident occurred when the elders ascended to the upper story of the house of Gadya in Jericho. A heavenly voice addressed them, saying, "There are two among you who are fit for Ruach HaKodesh to rest upon them. Hillel the elder is one of them." The elders directed their gaze towards Shmuel HaKatan. On another occasion, the elders ascended up to the upper story of a house in Yavne. A heavenly voice addressed them, saying, "There are two among you who are fit for Ruach HaKodesh to rest upon them. Shmuel HaKatan is one of them." The elders directed their gaze to Rebbe Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Also, they were joyful, for their understanding had accorded with that of the omnipresent. The commentaries have discussed whether this story is presenting a different account of the passages from the Talmud Yerushalmi cited previously above, because in that initial passage only one name was mentioned each time, or whether there were two incidents. Regardless, analysis is required why, in this instance, it was said, "There are two among you who are fit for Ruach HaKodesh to rest upon them." Hillel the elder is one of them, and the name of the second sage is not mentioned. The same issue applies regarding the second episode where only Shmuel HaKatan is mentioned. From the flow of this narrative, it appears that there were two separate incidents. The incidents described at the conclusion of the Talmud Yerushalmi occurred on an earlier time when Hillel and his student Shmuel HaKatan were together. At that time, Shmuel HaKatan had not yet attained the level of humility of Hillel, his teacher, for Hillel was much greater than him. This was what the heavenly voice was coming to say. Although they were both fit for Ruach HaKodesh to rest upon them, Shmuel's name was not mentioned, only Hillel's, to emphasize Hillel's distinction. The preceding story in the Talmud Yerushalmi regarding Hillel, which began, "There is one among you who is fit for Ruach HaKodesh," took place before the story in which both Hillel and Shmuel are mentioned. The story concerning Shmuel alone took place afterwards, after the death of Hillel, when the extent that he was fit for Ruach HaKodesh. It is possible to say that in the second incident described at the conclusion of Talmud Yerushalmi, when the elders directed their gaze to Rabbi Elazar ben Horokanas, his distinction also resulted from his humility. As the Talmud relates, the sages came and asked him several questions. He refrained from answering them, but instead diverted the discussion to other matters. It was not because he was distancing them with words, diverting their attention to other matters like one who intends to avoid the issue, because he does not know how to answer. In truth, Rebbe Elazar could have answered them, but refrained from doing so because he never conveyed a teaching that he did not hear from his teacher. Although he knew what to answer, he constantly felt bittul towards his teacher. Therefore, he could not share a new concept that he developed with his own logic from the general principles that he heard from his teacher. To illustrate the concept by borrowing wording from the laws regarding salting meat, one that is engrossed in absorbing cannot release. Nevertheless, the Rebbe Elazar's humility concerned merely his relationship with his teacher, or even his relationship with his students and those who asked him questions. It was not comparable to the humility of Shmuel HaKatan as a whole, and how much more so after Shmuel ascended to the level of humility possessed by Hillel. Therefore, in the second instance, only Shmuel HaKatan's name was mentioned, and not the name of Rebbe Elazar ben Horokanas. Okay. Interesting. Parashas NASO. Okay. Everything the Holy One, blessed be He, created in this world, in His world, has a purpose. He did not create anything needlessly. As highlighted in the sichos to follow, this insight presents an uplifting but challenging lesson. On one hand, it endows each of us with a genuine sense of meaning and purpose. Our lives and every moment of them are an integral part of God's desire for existence as a whole. Each one of us has a unique role to play in God's all-encompassing intent, and the way we live matters to Him. He truly cares about everything we do. Everything everyone does matters. Every person, everything matters. On the other hand, that very awareness conveys an awesome responsibility. Everything we do in every moment of our lives must be aligned with His purpose and will. To quote the sichos, when a Jew fails to use even the smallest detail of the portion of the world designated for him and lets it go to waste, God's entire creation is disrupted. Each of us must be careful regarding every potential and every element that God granted us, not to allow them to be left unused. Instead, they should be employed in the most complete manner for the goal and purpose for which God created them. Similar concepts apply regarding maximizing our use of time. Even when a person has filled 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day with positive and fruitful Torah activity, he must endeavor that one remaining minute not go to waste. The Rebbe anchors the above concepts. in a discussion regarding the gifts of Nesiim, leaders of the Jewish people, made at the time of the dedication of the sanctuary in the desert. They brought 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen, a wagon for every 2 Nesiim, and an ox for each one. The Rebbe focuses on an obvious question. Why were the Nesiim so constrained in their donation of the wagons and the oxen, each one giving no more than half a wagon and only 1 ox, as the sichos explains? The answer to that question revolves around this issue, how to use every element of existence to its maximum. Parenthetically, the Rebbe highlights several other dimensions of the gifts brought by the Nesiim. Their gifts were categorized as offerings, having a consecrated status similar to that of the sacrifices brought on the altar. Their gifts were their gifts completed the construction of the sanctuary, as it were, since the sanctuary was intended to accompany the Jews on their journey through the desert until the oxen and wagons were donated. That purpose could not be fulfilled. So parashas NASO, the precision of the mission God charts for us. The precision of the mission God charts for us. Was this place for parsimony? This week's Torah reading states, "It came to pass on the day that Moshe finished erecting the sanctuary, he anointed it and sanctified it. The Nesiim of Israel brought an offering. They brought their offering before God, 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen, a wagon for every 2 Nesiim and an ox for each one. And they presented them in front of the sanctuary." There is a difficulty with this narrative. When asked to donate towards the sanctuary, the Jewish people responded with abundant generosity to the point where their donations were sufficient. And indeed, there was more than enough. So why then were the Nesiim so constrained in their donation of the wagons, each one giving no more than half a wagon for each 2 Nesiim? Furthermore, the Sifri and the Midrash, quoted by Rashi, describe that motivated the Nesiim to offer these donations. What prompted the Nesiim to be the first to donate for the dedication of the altar? By contrast, they were not fit to donate for the work of constructing the sanctuary. The Nesiim had said, "Let the community donate what they will donate, and if they leave anything lacking, we will complete it." Since they saw the community had completed donating everything as it is written, and the work was sufficient, the Nesiim said that, "What is left for us to do now?" Therefore they brought the shoham stones and the stones to be mounted on the ephod for the breastplate. For this reason they donated first in this instance. It's found in the Sifrei, B'midbar Rabbah. In other words, the donation of the Nesiim brought on the day Moshe completed the erection of the sanctuary were intended to rectify the fact that they did not donate in a sufficient, eager, and liberal manner. Originally, with these donations of the wagons and oxen, they sought to express their generosity for the sanctuary in a desirable and complete manner. But how did they do this? By each Nasi bringing only half a wagon? There's a further point, one that is of even greater need of clarification, as is evident from a straightforward reading of the verse, as explicitly stated in the Midrash. Nesiim brought the 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen to transport the sanctuary. Indeed, these donations were actually used for this purpose, as the Torah explicitly states. Moshe divided the wagons among the family of the Levites, as was necessary according to their service. 2 wagons and 4 oxen for the descendants of Gershon, and 4 wagons and 8 oxen for the descendants of Merari. Now the Nisim knew how many boards and pillars comprised the sanctuary, and could have estimated their weight, and that of the 100 sockets, each one of the weight of which weighed a sanctified talent. The difficulty in transporting all the component parts of the sanctuary is magnified by the fact that, according to calculation of the Talmud, the length of the wagon was 5 cubits, and the width of the wagon was 2.5 cubits. Accordingly, the boards had to be placed one on top of the other, 12 boards horizontally, 2 double stacks on each wagon, and a cubit of empty space between the double stacks. For this reason, a Levite had to follow the wagon. See the diagram on the top of the following page. Pay attention that the boards do not shift position, and as Rashi explains, if necessary, fix the arrangement of boards one on top of the other so that the upper board would not fall. Rashi continues, he would follow the wagon throughout the entire journey. When he would see boards slipping into the empty space between the stacks, he would run to the place where the boards jutted out on the side until he reached the cubit of empty space between the stacks. He would squeeze himself so that he could stand in the space of half a cubit between the side of the wagon and the side of the public domain, until he would be able to return the board that slipped to its place, the original slipped to its place in the arrangement. See the diagram on the board on the bottom of the following page. Added to the boards were the pillars and the sockets of the sanctuary, 60 pillars of the courtyard. There are 60 brass sockets. All of these articles had to be placed on but 4 wagons. On the surface, this donation reflects the very opposite of the approach of generosity, abundance, and wealth that characterized the sanctuary in the base of Mikdash, considering which our sages said there is no room for an approach that bespeaks poverty in a place of wealth. Were there to have been more wagons, it would not have been necessary to stack so many boards on top of the other, and the Levites would have been spared the effort of paying attention to the boards of the sanctuary throughout the entire time the boards were being transported. A resolution and its rejection. According to a straightforward understanding of Scripture, there is seemingly a readily apparent answer. For that reason, Rashi does not focus on the matter. Previously in parashas, when explaining that the donations for the sanctuary included acacia wood, Rashi comments, from where did they get this wood in the desert? Rabbi Tachuma explains that our father Yaakov foresaw with Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, that the Israelites were destined to build a sanctuary in the desert. Therefore he brought cedar trees to Egypt and planted them there. He commanded his sons, who conveyed this command to their children and later descendants, to cut them down and to take them along with when they left Egypt. True, from the spoils they took from Egypt and the spoils they collected after the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, the Jews in the desert possessed prodigious wealth, including silver, gold, jewels, and the like. Nevertheless, from this teaching, it is apparent that the only way they could have had acacia wood in the desert was to have brought acacia trees from Eretz Yisrael to Egypt, planted them there, and after caring for them for 210 years, taken them into the desert. From this wood they had to make the boards and the pillars and other articles for the sanctuary. Therefore, because there was a shortage of acacia wood, the number of wagons was limited, and included only what was absolutely necessary. However, this is not a satisfactory resolution, because the wagons were donated solely because of the generosity of the Nisim. There was no command that they be made specifically from acacia wood. Moreover, it is difficult to say that in all of Egypt the Jews could not find other strong wood from which they could make additional wagons. Note also that our sage's statement that certain items were purchased from non-Jewish merchants who passed through the desert. There must have been a reason. Sifri, and similarly the Midrash, derive from God's command to Moshe, take the offering from them, that the Nesiim came and stood before the sanctuary with the wagons and the oxen. But Moshe did not accept them from them until he was told by the Holy One, take them from them. Thus the Nesiim's understanding accorded with the sublime understanding. From this it is apparent that the donation of the wagons, and as a matter of course their number, was dictated by divine wisdom. Similarly, the sacrifices that the Nesiim brought for the dedication of the altar as a continuation of their donations included several details that were unique divine directives, specifically for that time, as spelled out by our sages, and also by Rashi. For example, an intense offering brought by a private individual was offered by the outer altar, something that was never repeated again. It can be assumed that such a unique directive came in accordance with Moshe's agreement and God's wisdom. True, the Nesiim offered the sacrifices on their own initiative, and Moshe did not accept them until he was instructed to do so by God. Nevertheless, it was clearly understood that when God told Moshe that they shall bring their offerings for the dedication of the altar, the offerings were brought based on God's command. Similar concepts apply regarding the donation of the wagons. However, it is not logical to say that the limited number of wagons was a divine decree without any clear reason. Indeed, as explained above, it appears to run contrary to logic. This conclusion is supported by the fact that initially the Nesiim made the donation according to their own thinking. Only afterwards was it revealed that it was in accord with divine wisdom. Note as well that the offerings brought for the dedication of the altar had no parallel. Never before nor afterwards were such offerings brought, nor were sacrifices ever offered in such a manner. All of these offerings were brought as a result of a unique divine decree, since the Nesiim brought them on their own initiative, that they had their own reason for the types of number of offerings they brought each, alluding to a different concept, as our sages explain at length. Similar concepts apply regarding the matter at hand, the donation of the wagons. We must say that the fact that the donation consisted of a minimal number of wagons and oxen in a manner that appears to run contrary to the general principle that applied regarding the sanctuary, there is no room for an approach that bespeaks poverty in a place of wealth, indicates that there was a reason and explanation why they had to make their donation in this manner. From the relevant Talmudic passages, it is evident, indeed emphatically so, that the size of the wagons had to be exact, no longer and no wider than the place required for the boards to be placed, without the slightest amount of extra space that was not needed for that purpose. Thus, on the phrase, the length of the wagon was 5 cubits, the Talmud asks, why was that necessary? 4.5 would have been sufficient. The Talmud gives a practical answer, so that the beams will not be pressed against each other. Similarly, with regard to the width of the wagons, 2.5 cubits, the Talmud asks, why was that necessary? 1.5 cubits would have been sufficient. The answer is so that the boards do not teeter during the journey. Thus, clearly there is a rationale for the wagon's exact size. A different type of offering. It is possible to offer an explanation of the above difficulty by first clarifying one of the differences between the wording used by Sifri and that used by the Midrash, and quoting our sages' teaching cited in section 1. Sifri states, what prompted the Nesiim to be the first to donate for the dedication of the altar, where by contrast, they were not the first to donate for the work of constructing the sanctuary. Rashi also uses similar wording, however the Midrash words the question differently, stating, why did the Nasiim eagerly come and bring their offerings for the altar first, although they were lax regarding to the work of constructing the sanctuary and did not bring their donations until the end? One of the differences in the wording used is that according to Sifri, the 6 wagons and the 12 oxen were not categorized as korbanos, offerings, but merely as donations. By contrast, the Midrash speaks of bringing offerings. Following the wording of the verse, they brought their offering. Thus the Midrash proceeds to state, when the sanctuary was completed, they acted first and brought their offering eagerly. This is indicated by the verse, the Nasiim of Israel brought their offering. Similarly, in the later source in the Midrash, we find a similar reference to the wagons and oxen brought by the Nasiim. Moshe feared that perhaps one of the wagons would break or one of the oxen would die, and thus the sacrifice of the Nasiim would become invalid. The Holy One, blessed be He, told him, they shall be by doing so. He endowed them with timeless existence, so that they would exist forever. The Midrash proceeds to mention different opinions where the oxen were offered as sacrifice on the altar. In Nav, in Givon, in the Beis HaMikdash, or in Gilgal. In other words, it is possible to interpret the Midrash in 2 ways. According to the beginning of the Midrash, it speaks of the Nasiim coming and bringing the wagons and oxen. The bringing of the offering was referred to as a sacrifice, primarily to highlight their personal initiative. To borrow a term from Talmudic scholarship, it was a function of the Gavra. However, the second portion of the Midrash, which speaks of the sacrifice of the Nasiim being invalid, implies that their initiative caused the objects that they brought, the wagons and the 12 oxen, in Talmudic parlance, the cheftza, to become consecrated as a sacrifice. In any case, according to all opinions, there was no need for more than 6 wagons, even though this reflected constraint, the opposite of a wealthy person's approach with regard to the wagons and the oxen, completing the sanctuary's construction. To clarify the points raised initially after its initial statement, the Midrash proceeds to explain. The Nasiim said, "What shall we bring?" And they went and brought wagons and would carry the sanctuary. Who offered this advice? The tribe of Yisachar. This is what they told them. Will the sanctuary that you build fly in the air? Donate wagons that will carry it. It can be said that the intent is that the advice they gave was not merely peripherally related to the sanctuary, a practical solution regarding how to transport the sanctuary from one place to another, but rather redefining the nature of the sanctuary. It would become an entity that is transported by wagons. Without the wagons, the sanctuary would essentially be an entity that flies in the air. The wagons and the 12 oxen were not merely mediums to transport the sanctuary from place to place, but rather they were brought about a change and a state of completion of the sanctuary, affecting its very substance. Since the sanctuary was built as the tent of meeting, i.e. it was a tent, a temporary structure, intended to be transported from place to place, accompanying the Jewish people on their journey through the desert, as long as there were no wagons and oxen to transport it. The construction of the sanctuary was not complete, as indicated by their question, will the sanctuary that you build fly in the air? According to this conception, bringing the wagons and the oxen completed the sanctuary. Thus, the effect is comparable to the effect of bringing the offerings of the altar. Those sacrifices prepared and dedicated the altar so that the sacrifices could be brought on it in an ongoing manner. In other words, the sacrifices for the dedication of the altar completed its construction. Similarly, the wagons and the oxen to transport the sanctuary function in relation to the sanctuary like the sacrifices that dedicated the altar. The wagons and the oxen completed the fashion of the sanctuary. No more and no less. Based on the above, it is understood that although the approach that characterized the sanctuary and the base of Mikdash was one of wealth and bounty, there was not a single entity or detail that was not used for a specific action or purpose. It is possible to offer the hypothesis that were a particular element or detail in the sanctuary, which is also called a mikdash, to be uncalled for and unnecessary. It would be like bringing a non-sacrificial food into the courtyard of the sanctuary, bringing something mundane into the sanctuary. Similar concepts apply regarding the wagons and the oxen, which became a part of the sanctuary. They had to be precisely measured, ensuring that their size and number were no less than necessary, but no more than necessary, so that there would not be any portion or detail which would not be used for its intended purpose. Transporting the sanctuary. The measure of everything had to be precise, both in the number of wagons, 6 no more, and in their size, that they not be larger than necessary. Similarly, this principle applied to the 12 oxen that pulled the wagons. True, this was a very heavy burden. However, it was necessary to use the strength and power of each of the 12 oxen that pulled the wagons to the fullest extent. Whether to have been more or larger wagons or more oxen, not only would the addition not have been part of the construction of the sanctuary, but there would have been an imprecision in the measure of the wagons and the oxen. This principle is so fundamental that the Torah includes a specific phrase, all the silver of the utensils, to teach it. Our sages interpret that phrase as meaning that all the utensils of the sanctuary were of precise weight, whether weighed individually or collectively. There was neither more nor less than a specified amount. Note as well, in a somewhat similar vein, the ruling of our sages, sacred utensils only sanctify their contents when they are full. The mitzvah was not given to the oxen. A further point can be added. The above explanation follows the opinion of the Midrash that the wagon and the 12 oxen were categorized as sacrifices. Accordingly, there certainly cannot be any element or detail that is used for the purpose transporting the sanctuary. However, even according to the understanding of Sifri and Rashi, it emphasized that the wagons and the oxen were brought to transport the sanctuary without categorizing them as sacrifices. As explained, an explanation can be given the constraint in the number of wagons and oxen. Transporting the sanctuary was one of the services performed by the Levites, as stated in the beginning of the Torah reading. This is the service of the families of the Gershonites to serve and to transport. Similarly, it is written regarding the descendants of Merari. This is what they are charged to transport as their entire service of the tent of meeting, the boards of the sanctuary. It is thus understood that when God told Moshe to take the wagons and the oxen from the Nisim so that they will be used to carry out the service of the tent of meeting, give them to the Levites, each man in accordance with his work. The intent was not to remove the service of transporting the holy articles from the Levites, but this task endowed them with sanctity. Even after the oxen and the wagons were donated, the task of transporting the sanctuary remained the Levites, and they were responsible for loading the different elements of the sanctuary into the wagons and unloading them when setting up camp again. Moreover, even the elements of the sanctuary were being carried on the wagons. The Levites were charged with the following wagons. The wagons, as will be explained, the purpose of the wagons was solely to lessen the burden. Even then, the wagons and the oxen were not the ones who transported the sanctuary. Instead, it was the Levites who transported the sanctuary via wagons. For this reason, the Nesiim's understanding accorded with the sublime understanding, and they donated only 6 wagons. Despite the heavy weight of the burden transported by the descendants of Merari, they were given only 4 wagons. As mentioned, the Levites were charged with the task of transporting the sanctuary. For this reason, the sanctuary had to be transported in a manner requiring a Levite to follow the wagons throughout the entire journey and pay attention to the position of the boards and the articles. When he would see boards slipping into the empty space between the stacks of the boards on the wagons, he would run, as mentioned in section 1 above. Since the Levites were those who transported the sanctuary, this responsibility was theirs. The wagons only served to facilitate their task. Everything has a purpose. There is an all-encompassing lesson that the above for our divine service our sages teach. Everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in His world has a purpose. He did not create anything needlessly. This principle is an all-embracing, applicable at all times and all places, in every detail and element of creation. At the time of the construction of the sanctuary, God said, "I came into my garden, my wedding, my chamber." Basi Lagani Laganuni. After all the sins that caused the divine presence to withdraw from the earth at the time of the construction of the sanctuary, the divine presence descended to the earth again, and it was revealed as reflected in the verse, "They shall make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." At the completion of the construction, it became clear that it did not contain any superfluous element. Every individual detail was used in full for which God created it. Therefore, although the sanctuary was characterized by an approach that reflected abundance and wealth, it did not contain any needless elements. Instead, it was apparent how every specific element fulfilled its purpose and the goal of its creation accordingly, since 12 oxen and 6 wagons of a specific length and width were sufficient to transport the sanctuary. There was no reason to add anything beyond that. Any surplus that existed because of the donation should and must have been used for another purpose in the sanctuary. Herein lies a lesson for every Jew regarding the construction of his personal sanctuary. Our sages noted that the word "visocham" among them is in the verse, "They shall make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them," employs a plural form, not the singular within it. The implication is that God's dwelling is not only in the structure of the sanctuary, but in every individual Jew. The above explanation emphasizes the extent to which each of us must be careful regarding every potential and every element that God granted us. So like our speech, our eyes, our nose, our body, our brain, our ears, all our possessions, our emotions, time, not to allow them to be left unused or misused. Instead, they should be employed in the most complete manner for the goal and purpose for which God created them, as indicated by our sages saying, "I was created to serve my Creator. I was created to serve my Creator." This applies to every one of the powers of our souls powers our souls possesses. Every power also our soul possesses. Soul and body. For example, when one does not labor in Torah study as necessary, he is not utilizing the potential which God gave him in a complete manner. Similar concept apply to every partial detail and element of our personal abilities. We must use them for the sake of heaven. So, if you have a skill, you have a talent or success, you're successful in a certain area, personally, abilities, you must use them for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim. And to gain knowledge of God, they should be employed for the sake of observing the mitzvahs in a meticulous manner, and also and particularly for spreading Yiddishkeit outward. Growing in Judaism, growing in Yiddishkeit outwardly. Outwardly for ourselves or outwardly in our world? Both? Neither? Not neither. One. Outward, for spreading Yiddishkeit outward. I guess on every level. Like it says, on every level. Similar concepts apply regarding maximizing our use of time. Even when a person has filled 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day with positive and fruitful Torah activities, he must endeavor that the one remaining minute not go to waste. Lishma, we're not employees. We don't clock in and clock out. It's 24/7, even when we sleep. Even when we eat, even when learning never ends. Our time, we use our time. We don't let it pass us by, because that would be ungrateful. Chaz v'shalom, chaz v'chalila. A responsibility incumbent upon each of us. This lesson can be derived from the sanctuary. Whenever anything appears superfluous and is not being used to fulfill its purpose in complete sense, something is lacking. Not only for that particular entity, but for the entire construction of the sanctuary, and consequently, the indwelling of the divine presence within the world is not complete. It's all connected to the shellis. Each person is so important, and we're connected to every other person. When we also fulfill this maximizing the use of our time, and maximizing the use of our personal skills and abilities for the sake of heaven, Hashem Shemaim, other people will also be able to do the same. It brings redemption. It's a step in the right. It's going up. It's lifting everyone up. And then the blessings come down from that, and then those people do, and it feeds off, it feeds off. So being okay with what you're doing and cooling down mitzvahs is this Amalekite idea needs to be eradicated. And is one of the mitzvahs we're saying. So we have to do it. We can't fail. Just choose to do the right thing. When a Jew fails to use even the smallest detail of the portion of the world designated for him and lets it go to waste, God's entire creation is disrupted. Opposite. So instead of you pulling gold shell us up, it's bringing everything down. someone is not using their mouth properly, they're not speaking like a Jew, they're using improper language, they're saying things that are improper, they're hurting people with their body, or with their words, or with their intent. It's disrupting the entire creation, as it were, because God did not create anything in His world needlessly. Conversely, when everyone uses all of his potential for the purpose for which he was created, to serve his Creator, he causes the divine presence to rest in his own person and in the entire world in a revealed manner. Galus versus Geula. When you have Hashem and you add that Aleph, that's Geula. Once you take that out and you're not living according to L'Shem Shemaim and doing everything, your abilities, your Torah learning, your mindset, your emotional, you're having a good eye, you're having a good heart, you're having a good thoughts. This needs to be 24/7. Forever, 8/24. When every particular element of creation carries out the specific purpose for which God created it, it will be revealed throughout the entire creation and every element of it that it is God's handiwork and that it is He who is actually bringing it into being. Such efforts will lead to the building of the third base of Mikdash. In it will be included the sanctuary that Moshe had constructed, the tent itself and all its utensils, for it exists for all time. We have it. It's just we have to make the effort to make everything L'Shem Shemaim, every Jew. It's just a choice. It says this in Tanya too. You pick your level, you pick it. You need to stop making excuses, stop lowering the bar. It's a choice. To be the greatest that we can be, that Hashem made us. Every single person. No more trauma. Don't pick trauma. Pick Geula. Pick healing, love, friendship, Torah, light. Each of us an ambassador for those things. This will take place in the third base of Mikdash. May it be built speedily in our days by Mashiach, so that not even one moment will pass in a wasteful manner, but instead the redemption will come immediately. No more landfills. We're not throwing things away. We're not wasting things. There's no reason for it. There's no reason for all the garbage. There's no garbage. There's no hate. There's no darkness. As in the days of your exodus from the land of Egypt, when God did not delay them for even the blink of an eye, may all this take place now, Mamish. Parashas NASO, the precision of the mission God charts for us. Achieving perfect unity.